てください。やめて。
So I've been debating how and when to exactly share this with everyone, but since I see lots of people considering harvesting their Lophophora, which they purchased or they've grown themselves, I do not see an issue with consuming your own cactus if you're in a country that's permitted. The usual route that people go about harvesting would be making a flat cut, leaving some areolas to potentially pup on the bottom, and then they would harvest the entire crown. It's been shared this way online by various indigenous growers or collectors, which I see no problem with them doing that. But it's also been shared by some scientists where they say it's the proper harvesting technique, which I actually don't believe is the optimal way to harvest. Maybe it's the best way to harvest in habitat, which I do not condone unless you're a native practicing. So the way I see it, to best harvest based on the anatomy and growing habits of Lophophora, is actually shaving the outer skin and beveling it. So the idea, here's the bottom spines, I'll leave it at an angle. I don't want to harvest the entire button, but rather the dark skin that envelops it. So I'm still harvesting a little bit more since there's very dark flesh still. And yeah, that's the idea. I would allow this to callus and grow. Here's the other button. You can also do this and graft the spine if you wanted to. The natural peyote growth, depending on how you cultivate it, is kind of like a muffin top, so harvesting shouldn't be too difficult. Just shave a little bit more, take out the very dark flesh. And in traditional harvesting, besides removing the apex, you also have a lot of lighter flesh, which for some reasons people will discard either way. So here it is. You always want to cut outward so that the main, the main vascular bundle won't be damaged. And then here's the flesh. Which you can store or just toss away. If there were any troughs or spines, you would remove them so that the spines don't remain in your compost. So this is my idea of a better way to harvest. I'm not promoting wild harvesting, but this would prevent a gapping in seed production. In theory, we'll have to see. It would increase seed production since flowering shouldn't necessarily be impeded. Whereas if you harvest the button as it is traditionally, removing the crown entirely, you would have to wait until it pups, which takes a few months, and for it to mature again. Where in this case, it'll be, if it were flowering or flowering age, it shouldn't necessarily be impeded by this harvesting style. It might pup here in the lower areolas. And since it's a graft, it's quite columnar. Here you could coat it with something. I've seen some natives say that they put soil back on. In my case, I would use this granite since it's quite dry. This one is not as well, but if you bury this, it'll prevent excessive drying out, which I do with cuttings as well. And yeah, if you guys are in favor of this or against this, I know most people say they grow just for the sake of growing, but many people start this hobby with other intentions. And if you're cultivating your own plants, there is absolutely nothing wrong with harvesting. So this is just a proof of concept of my idea. If these grafts are successful, I'll try it with other grafts, and later on I'll do it with my own root, Lophophora, to see how well it is in practice. Alright, thanks for watching. Leaving the actual apex intact, since all new growth comes from the apex. Harvesting this way would not reduce the amount of flowers, in theory at least. So I have some videos, I think 2 months ago or 3 months ago, where I demonstrate my idea for a better harvesting technique. this growth was during winter, so it's still minimal. It's on a small stalk. These were for impale grafts that the root did not develop as I wanted it to. It was using this technique, but on smaller grafts. So growth rate should be much higher during spring and winter, or spring and summer. But as you can see from the original harvest, which was only leaving the few center areolas, it's already the same size it was harvested from. So these are grafts. Many people say that they're weaker and so. They should be weaker based on water content, but dry material should be relatively similar to other growing conditions. In the future, I also have some content about increasing mescaline content as a protective measure for inoptimal growing conditions. I think everyone that selects trichocereus seedlings for breeding, unless they actually test the content, I think a better way would be to grow the first year or two in very stressful conditions, like minimal organic material, like here, high stress, like extreme sunlight, where I believe the stronger growing cacti are have more mescaline content, since I see mescaline as a growth regulator during stressful conditions. I don't see mescaline only as a deterrent, but it would be, I guess, a memory for stressful conditions, and so that they continue to grow as best they can during drought, excessive sunlight, cold, and other conditions. So in my opinion, obviously I need to grow this out longer and find a way to measure the content. But these would be the weaker mescaline content cacti, and the rest should, in theory, at least in my theory, have higher mescaline content, since they have adapted and grown in the stressful conditions. Other alkaloids in other plants have shown that they help plants grow during stress when they're applied extraneously, or they actually have the content in the leaves themselves. And I don't see why it wouldn't apply to plants, or to mescaline. Some growers say that you should fertilize excessively and nitrogen helps increase content. In practice, it does increase content, but not by concentration, but rather biomass accumulation. Since it grows faster, overall, all the high fertilized and optimal conditions do contain more alkaloids, but not through concentration, but again, sheer volume. So if you have the room and the means to fertilize heavily and the conditions to grow them out, that's the best route if you want content. But for, I guess, healthier quote unquote healthier plants, you would want to grow them in stressful conditions and let them adapt and grow to their ability. Well, that's my opinion at least. I don't see how the current trichocereus hybrid community is being helped with all these names for clones. I guess for following the lineage, it's fine, but other than that, I don't see how naming a cactus just because it flowered or just because you want to sell it for a higher price point, I don't see how that's beneficial. Sacred Succulents did a nice release in the beginning. It was SS1, SS2, SS3, SS4 for their clones, and I guess you could follow it as phenotypes. But recently there's like a few hundred names, and they don't really mean anything, more marketing, in my opinion. But yeah, I just see mescaline as a growth regulator, not a growth hormone, but just a growth regulator where as it accumulates more alkaloids, including mescaline, not mescaline alone, it'll adapt to those stressful conditions and grow better compared to other plants that, in my opinion, don't accumulate those alkaloids. But again, I could be wrong. These may be the strong ones and the rest could be weak. But in theory, I think it's the other way around. But yeah, and since everyone's mass sowing in like 1,000 lots, I would say stress out a majority of your seedlings and select those that grow best. If you're in a cold region, grow it as cold as you can. Not obviously, it won't survive days upon days of freezing, but a few hours of freezing, you might have some survivors. If you're in the desert, try to keep it in hot and use low nitrogen or low nutrients, but everyone's in a rush, I guess. I also don't agree necessarily with grafting, since you would be saving a cactus whose genetics would probably die off before it reaches flowering or a size that it could sustain itself. But everyone has their own growing reasons. Some people, especially recently, highly enjoy variegated cacti. In my eyes, unless it can survive on its own roots, I don't necessarily like variegated or heavily variegated plants. Again, unless they can survive on their own roots. But again, everyone has their own growing reasons, and these are just my opinions. So going back to this harvesting technique, I'll show the previous videos I've made harvesting. You would still need quite a bit of material, since every 100 grams of wet flesh, just the outer skin, every 100 grams would be about 7 grams dry. So you still need a bit of material, but you wouldn't reduce its flowering potential, so seeds should continue. And yeah, that's my idea. I'm sure many people will hate this idea. I'll follow up in the future with harvesting an own root seedling. And you could probably even apply this to trichocereus. It wouldn't be as practical since the growth rate on these are much higher. Now going to rooted own root seedlings. In my opinion, even harvesting the way I mentioned, where you cut the outer flesh and only leave the apex, I think that the root shoot ratio would actually increase growth rate and might help have better growth longer term. Some people might say that that's contradictive since they would have less photosynthesis occurring since you remove the flesh. But the accumulated energy from the roots would, instead of it spending its energy pupping and starting again, it would just throw all its energy into growing from the apex. If you listen to Trout's lecture on Lophophora, he explains that in habitat, obviously not on all the plants, but on many plants, the crown that you see is actually all new growth, and that the plants are covered and you only see the new growth. Whereas in cultivation, we see big mounds of cactus like this. We see large mounds on top of the soil. Whereas in nature, it would naturally, a mudslide or rains would cover this plant, leaving only the crown, or even covering it completely, where it would stay a few months probably underground, growing to reach the surface. And then from there, with all the energy it has, it would just grow very wide and large. So this is all in theory. In practice, it's still new to me. I would harvest this to show, but this is likely not a Williamsy, since you can see that the ribs are not as straight from the apex and they're not as well defined. Everyone says you have to wait for the flower, but this is most likely not a Williamsy, but we'll see. I'll leave it to flower. These were from my original seed mix, so it's not Williamsy. But the other two are Williamsy. So yeah, that's my idea on a different harvesting style that will actually be beneficial to continuing the flowering and maturity of the crown while you're able to harvest. And for now, I would only suggest doing this on grafts since they're much faster. I have a 500 seed lot planter, which I'll, after it grows like a year, I'll split some up and do a few experiments, and one of them will be harvesting with this technique. I'll try to measure out mortality rate and see their growth rate compared to those that were left alone. I also set a few aside to cut the taproot and test or see their mortality rate and their growth rate longer term as well, compared to unharvested and uncut taproots. So this is a long-term project. Hopefully it has interest from other growers. This video might be a bit long since I'll have to collect a few videos together. I'll try to edit out or cut some of this monologue. Things should be growing a bit faster in a month since spring is approaching. But yeah, that's my idea. If I were to harvest this, I would get the knife and cut around the apex, leaving the core. I would actually only shave the flesh and not cut the entire button. Similar to trichocereus, I only want the darker flesh. I wouldn't want the white flesh, even if it does have some alkaloids, since that wouldn't interest me, and leaving that material, I believe, would actually benefit the remaining stock. So when these are larger, I'll split up maybe in 3 or 4 different conditions. One will be left alone, the other will be harvested with my technique. Another lot will be harvested just cutting the crown like normally, and another one will be cutting the taproot, and then we'll see a comparison of all 4 growths. So this was the degraft. There's maybe 2 or 3 centimeters of the body under the gravel, and this is the exposed root, Lophophora. Traditionally, you would cut the crown and you would just leave the taproot with a few older areolas that you can see some from the wrinkled flesh here. In my idea for a better way to harvest, you would shave the flesh, leaving the apex completely intact, and you would just shave the outer part. After this gets its first bud and flower, I'll harvest this and keep it as a reference, since I'm not just suggesting this so that other people do it, but I'll actually do it myself. However, I want to see this flower to maturity first to test my theory that it doesn't affect the flowering or the maturity of the plant. Whereas where you harvest, it basically resets, and the rib count will go back to 5. This is still 5. If it flowers at 5, it doesn't matter, but with the larger heads, you wouldn't have to restart. Another thing supporting my idea is that when you have severe spider mite, after a few years you see that the spider mite damage basically disappears because the old growth accumulates at the bottom, and we always see the new growth at the top. So there you are. That's my idea for a different way of harvesting. In field, this may not be practical, but the indigenous harvest the way that they believe is best. For cultivars that would want to harvest their plant, I believe this is a better way, considering their anatomy and growth habits, since this always grows from the apex, and in nature the body sometimes is covered for months, and the older flesh always becomes subterranean flesh. And here's the root, subterranean flesh, which is this wrinkled material which you might see a few areolas. You can see it corking the top. It'll just become like this middle part and the new flesh. So in theory, you should be able to harvest yearly. Obviously, I haven't tested any regrowth parameters or any other conditions, but just considering how it grows, it should be completely different than a completely new crown or button. So yeah, I'm sure lots of people will get upset with this post. If you have extra Lophophora willing to share your experience, please do so. And thanks for watching.